everybody, and welcome to Masnagan Isqueak. Look, I learned how to pronounce it properly this time. It's only been... Isqueo is one, Isqueak is multiple, so I've finally learned how to pronounce it properly. Go us. But also, there's this big thing over whether or not you need a macron within Isqueo or Isqueak. We spell it with, you can spell it without. It depends on where you're from. All the Nietzsches across Cree territories. I am Kayla.
I'm Tanya.
And I'm Sheila.
And yes, we have a special guest. Our special guest has taught two of the book women in the Faculty of Native Studies.
Who are the book women?
We are the book women.
Is that the name of the podcast?
Yeah.
First I'm hearing of this.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah, so we are the book women because we are all librarians.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Actually how we, so it comes about because that's actually how you save librarian, speaking about a female librarian in Crete. It's just a book woman. Dorothy translated that for us. So we are the book women. So we are here with our special guest. And do you want to introduce yourself?
Chris Andersen.
Cool. So, do you want to maybe elaborate on who you are, where you're from? You know, that thing we do?
Yeah. So I'm Chris Andersen. I'm Métis originally from the Parkland region of Saskatchewan. I grew up in Prince Albert and surrounding area in Saskatchewan. I did my undergrad and my master's at Queen's University in Ontario, and then I came back here to do a PhD in 1996, and then got hired in the faculty in 2000. And basically, I'm a living proof of what happens to mediocrity if it hangs around long enough. It just floats up to the top.
So would you be able to talk to us, Chris, a little bit about your experience with publishing?
Sure.
What kind of experience do you have in publishing? Publishing, editing, writing, anything like that?
Well, I published probably about 20 articles and book chapters. I think I'm up to 7 edited collections. I have a book that I published, and then I was co-writer of another book. I'm also the editor of Aboriginal Policy Studies and have been since 2010. So I would say I have a fair amount of experience with most kind of aspects of publishing involved in nonfiction, kind of academic-y writing, although I have done a very little bit of creative nonfiction as well.
Can you tell us a little about your creative nonfiction?
I wrote a piece for The Walrus about the way that Métis gets measured in the census and the problems with the way it gets measured in the census. That was not my favorite experience writing for Walrus, I would say, because and it's nothing to do with them, it's just when you don't write creative nonfiction, it's very difficult to move outside of the conventions of writing academic stuff. So, for example, I think they went through it 7 times, and every time they would say, ooh, can you give another flick about blah, 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 blah? Can you give another flick about blah, 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 blah? So when I look at the first draft and look at the 7th draft, they're very, very different kind of drafts. It ended up being a better piece, I would say, but I'm not used to people who don't know as much as I do about a subject telling me how to increase the rhetorical power of the piece, which it definitely did. They were very kind of surgical and really helpful, but yeah, it's very humbling.
What's a flick?
A great question.
Yeah.
And I emailed them back and asked the same question.
Yeah.
So the way that they read the piece was that they were going through it and looking for kind of moments in the piece that kind of pushed the story forward. And so if I got to a sentence that was either kind of really turgid or whatever, they would say, a flick is basically, can you add a sentence or a phrase or something like that that moves the actual narrative forward as opposed to kind of adds information to it. Because in fact the problem with the piece was that there was too much information in it and not enough kind of narrative flow. I think that's what I got from them. They haven't asked me to write since, so.
Oh, interesting.
I also wrote for Globe and Mail, and I made it in their opinion section, and they gave me 1 day to write it, and I wrote it and gave it to them. They're like, okay, and it just got published the next day after that. That was after the Daniels decision came out.
So you've kind of done a lot of different publishing styles or like kind of disciplinary styles. What's your favorite? Do you like writing more like academic, or do you like kind of writing that nonfiction or opinion pieces?
I mean, I like them both for different reasons. I think I'm probably better at writing the academic stuff because I have more training in it. I don't like writing things where I'm not citing my sources. And so I think that's one of the things that bothers me a lot about creative nonfiction is they don't cite a lot of their sources. And I think intellectual genealogy and intellectual generosity is really important when you write in an academic context, and which is why you cite people, even though we have mostly shitty citation styles. And most of the, like for example, someone will write a sentence and then they'll put the name and date of an author at the end, even though the thing that they're citing, the sentence that preceded it may have been only one tiny section of the whole book, but they'll cite the whole book. They'll be like, well, wait a minute, but this is not what the point of the book was. You're just too lazy to find the actual page number or chapter number or whatever to do it. So that annoys me, and I've been guilty of it as well, because it's just easy sometimes to kind of cite 3 or 4 things at the same time. But it's the thing I like most about academic writing is kind of the way in which intellectual genealogy gets positioned.
So what's your favorite citation style?
Oh, well, it should be everybody's favorite citation style.
Is it Chicago?
Of course it's Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago for the
But hang on. No, but Chicago manual of style is the style that every other style goes back to when they can't solve a particular problem.
Yeah.
Do you like author date or footnote?
No, author date for sure.
No,
you work too long. No, you work too long in that.
It's a pain in the butt.
It's a huge pain in the
all my
ass.
additional stuff right in my footnotes.
No, I do footnotes, but author date doesn't mean you can't have footnotes. I just don't put
true.
any of my references in my footnotes.
Oh, but I write like tiny essays in my footnotes.
No, I do too.
It's true, yes.
What do you put in your footnotes?
Everything.
Oh man.
Like a
Everything.
secret treasure hunt?
Generally speaking, what footnotes often get used for is they get used for arguments that basically support your main argument or are kind of another line of argument that you don't have time or space to get into.
A flick.
Except it's like a Sharpie marker flick.
Yes.
Because I did see I've seen footnotes that go multiple pages, like
Yeah.
same one footnote that goes multiple pages.
I've written reports that are literally like one sentence and then the footnote takes up the rest of the page.
That's dedication.
Oh man.
I love footnotes. I love putting stuff into footnotes.
It's why I never allowed students to do footnotes in my
Oh, yeah.
classes, because you get 3 lines of sentence and then ibid,
yeah.
because it's the same source over and over
Yeah.
again. So,
We've like
and that is no bueno.
for the class that like Tanya and I teach, we do an APA and it hurts my soul to do APA.
But most of the students do it wrong.
They do it wrong, and then we're
Doing
like,
it right
you did
doesn't
this
make it that
wrong.
much better.
Yeah.
Hey, now I'm an APA kind of gal.
Why?
'Cause
What do you get from APA that you don't get from Chicago Manual Style?
Oh, well, it's easy.
The Chicago Manual Style is easy.
I know. Man, this is the nerdiest conversation.
Who cares? It's the best conversation.
You're book women, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The nerdiest conversation that also has the phrase beer fart.
We can edit that out later.
No,
way. That's staying in there.
That's in the show notes. Oh man.
All right, Sheila, let it go.
Okay.
APA person.
Okay, that's fine. It's fine. So, how does your family feel about you publishing your family stories, if you have?
I haven't really published a lot of them yet because the dean position kind of slammed into it, and so that project's basically ground to a halt. It's actually something I feel really guilty about because I went into our community and a lot of people took the time to give me these really amazing stories, and I just haven't been able to do anything with them since. I don't think they care that much because I don't really think they know. Like, for example, a couple weeks ago I got a text from one of my cousins who lives in Whitecourt, and he said, "Hey cousin," he said, "we're playing a game where we read random sentences out of your book and then we try and guess what they mean."
Oh no.
And it's pretty common actually for people when there's only one academic in a family to do that. And so I wrote them back and I said, yeah, well, that's actually pretty common. So good luck. Let me know how you go. And then they wrote me back and said, well, most of your sentences seem to make more sense than we thought they would. Because I gave books out to a bunch of family, and they mostly used them for like coasters and to lift couches up and stuff like that. I don't too many of them read kind of the whole through. My wife only made it through to page 4.
The Metis,
Yeah.
like your big book.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've read it. I've read it like chapters multiple times in a row to kind of comprehend, but also I was taking your class on the Metis while doing that, so I felt like I needed to do that additional like read or 2 or 4.
Yeah, it's a little precious to use your own book in a class that you're teaching, but there wasn't a lot of other books out
Exactly.
there.
There wasn't a lot of books out there when I took this class in like 2015 that were as good as Chris's book. So it was kind of one of those things though where you definitely, if the person who wrote the book is sitting almost across from me at a table, you want to double read, triple read that book just so you feel like you make sure that, if you don't agree with something in the book, that you have a great argument against it.
For sure, it's a perfect opportunity to get ripped into. I've been ripped into on numerous occasions for the lack of gender analysis in the book, and quite fairly too, as far as that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had K-squared in that class, the 2 Kaylas. sitting side by side. So
Yeah. And Molly as well.
And Molly, yeah. And also, like, I've had recent, like, discussions with people how it wasn't only buffalo hunting.
I never said it was only buffalo hunting.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I said it's a buffalo hunting people. It was a mainstay of an economy, but they were mixed economy people.
That's true.
Now, if we want to get into an argument about whether the people really far away in small communities were Métis or not, that's a different discussion.
True, but you might have a NASAW presentation next year about not only buffalo hunting.
Oh, with Dave Parent?
Yeah.
He was recruiting
He was recruiting me.
for a panel
So
presentation.
he's got the fishing, I got the York boating.
Well, he doesn't really have the fishing.
Well, he says he has the fishing.
Yeah, Dave says a
And
lot of
we're
things.
coming for you on the buffalo hunting, so.
Yeah.
Or we could all just have this trifecta of everything.
Dave Parent, future podcast guest.
Dave would be awesome to have as a podcast
He
guest.
would be awesome.
You think I'm geeky?
No, we're all geeky.
Yeah.
Chris, can we rewind maybe like
Sure.
5 minutes?
Please.
Would you be able to talk a little bit about what your book is about for the listeners who haven't read it yet?
I've always wanted to say this. Which one?
Métis. I'm thinking Métis.
And then talk about
Sources and methods. I really like that
sources
one.
and methods.
And there's
There's
also
Indigenous in the
Indigenous
city, yeah.
statistics as well.
Oh, yeah.
Indigenous statistics,
That's a
yeah.
big one, too, that people just really, like, completely forget about for some
Yeah,
reason.
why isn't that
It's
one
a
on the
story of my
comps
life.
list? Why didn't that make the comps?
I think it did make the comps list.
I didn't see it.
I
At
think
least
it's under
not yet.
critical Indigenous studies, I thought.
It's not.
Yeah, it's not that good a book.
But it's important.
Yeah, I mean, it's important because it's not, like North of 60 was really good because there wasn't 6 or 7 different series that were like North of 60. When you're the only book in a particular genre, like it was not a good experience writing that book either, I would say. There was, I don't know how much I can say, there was lawsuits involved, there was some pretty banana stuff that was part of it. My Métis book is a book about why so many people call themselves Métis when they're not. And the thing I learned about that book is that people really don't like you telling them they're not Métis when their parents and grandparents have been calling them Métis since they were a little kid, even when they're still not Métis. And so I was interested in looking at how the term Métis gets constructed in the courts and how it gets constructed in the census, and then how people have kind of started to use the term Métis as a way to push various types of greater or lesser nefarious political agendas, like in kind of Central and Eastern Canada.
The Eastern Métis.
Well, they're not Métis, but
Those folks.
the Eastern folks that call themselves Métis.
Yeah. Heavy quotations on that.
Yeah, which I'm sure you'll get hate mail now if they listen to this. If they listen to the podcast.
That's fine.
Let them hate on us. We're 3 strong Indigenous Métis women.
We're mean
Try
Métis
us.
aunties.
That's
Like
true.
they'd call us.
We're in our home territory. We're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, just be
we're
careful
good.
because some of them are pretty unhinged. So it's good to be careful.
Yeah, I know there's other Métis podcasts that are out there.
Yeah, which are also a bit unhinged.
Yes, they
Which
are.
I won't name
yes,
them,
they are.
But if you're Métis, aren't you just a little bit unhinged anyways?
Yeah, but there's good unhinged and bad unhinged.
That's true.
And they're not
Positive
Métis.
and negative troublemakers. When I read your book, Chris, I obviously am a library person, and all of the chapters in your book just kind of, for me, it spoke to library categorization. What's the word for that?
Yeah.
Categorization?
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Sheila, because you are the metadata expert. How would you, I guess, prefer to have your book categorized within a library system or within a book system?
What are my options?
Indians of North America, Indian authors.
Those are the current subject
Those are the current
headings.
subject
Yeah.
headings.
I mean, if those are the only subject headings that exist, law and society, it'd be nice to put it under that. French theory, because of how much Bourdieu I use. I'm not really a theorist, but people could probably get stuff out of it. Western Canada, is there like a Western Canadian?
There's like Canadian
really.
history. Like a lot of the times when you see like.
Well, it's not a history book though, so I wouldn't put it in Canadian history.
Well, like, so the way that it is now is like E99 is Indians of North America, like E98 to E99, Indians of North America. If you start getting into the FCs, that's where a lot of like fur trade history, Métis history is in. So there isn't really.
Is this within Library of Congress or
Yeah.
Dewey
That's
Decimal?
Library of Congress.
Okay.
I don't know Dewey. I stay away from Dewey.
Don't
I
we
did
all?
I did a project on Dewey when I was a wee beginning master's student.
There you
and
go.
I said
Hashtag racist.
and I will never go back to Dewey because I'm not all about that. So
Yeah.
Dewey's probably worse than Library of Congress. So
Dewey, I think it would be in the 971 area, which is like Indians,
I mean, I would put it under
history.
Indian. It's not history. It's historical sociology, if anything, but it's not kind of historiographical, and it doesn't. ask any of the questions or kind of fit in any of the conventions that a Canadian historian would normally be interested in. I for sure put it under law or law and society if there's one of those. Yeah, I find the way that libraries categorize things really weird, but at the same time, given the millions of books that they have to categorize, there's always going to be some weirdness. So,
as a librarian, I can assure you that it is weird.
Yeah.
So,
and we do a bit of like outsourcing to the bigger companies too for our like cataloging needs. So like OCLC, WorldCat, and
WorldCat had me in as
isn't it Kid Andersen?
oh yeah, I was just about to ask you about that.
Kiddo Andersen.
Kiddo Andersen.
Geez.
Nobody could get your name right, but how did like as an Indigenous author? How did you feel about having your name as Kiddo Andersen? And we tried to change that multiple times.
Oh, it still hasn't changed?
I don't know. I haven't looked recently, but
I mean,
from what I heard, the rumors in the mill was that social capital was used to get your name changed, but who knows really?
Oh.
and it
to
was
Kiddo?
Yeah. So Paul talked to Denise and said, "Hey, do you know that this is a problem?" And Denise said, "I will fix it," and then she did.
But it was-
she's fixed it to Kiddo or from Kiddo?
From Kiddo.
Oh, okay.
But it was one of those things where, like, I think it was, like, your actual physical book was coming up as Chris Andersen, but it was the e-book that was coming up with Kiddo. Because we have two. So we split our e-books from our physical copies that we hold in the library. So one was correct, but the other one was not.
Interesting.
That's so stupid.
Yeah.
Libraries can be stupid.
Yeah, I honestly don't care about most of that stuff only because if someone's not smart enough to find the book online, I don't really want them reading it anyway.
Yeah.
Because they put in the title and put in last name, like unless it was some giant screw up where they got the last name completely wrong as well. Other than that, I don't care really. Yeah.
I think that's fair enough.
I don't think that many people are taking the book out of the library anyway. If you look at the citations on Google Scholar, I'm only at like 300 or something like that.
How many is average? Do you know?
I sadly think that's above average, but
I would imagine it.
if you look at someone like Audra Simpson's book or Glenn Coulthard's book, they're like in the gazillions.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
It depends on your discipline, and like it depends on what you're using to calculate that. So I know because when I worked at U of T, like a lot of people would like want their Scopus age index. So how many times you've been cited. Anyway, it's a whole thing. And people like for job applications, like some fields will ask like, what is your Scopus H index? That's a thing, and if you don't do it right very quickly, people get mad at you because anyway, they do because people get mad at you.
You're what I would consider to be a fairly well-established author. What was the first thing that you actually published? Can you remember that?
Yeah, it was actually in 1998. I published a chapter on the first Pali decision that came out. And it was a chapter in Expressions in Canadian Native Studies, which was a textbook that the University of Saskatchewan had put together for intro Native Studies classes. And it's like 500 pages or something like that. I cringe now at what I wrote kind of like 20 years ago. But yeah, that was the first thing I ever published. But that was the first thing I ever published, but that's not the first thing I ever wrote. The first thing I ever wrote was a piece for Canadian Journal of Sociology, or maybe Canadian Journal of Sociology and Anthropology. And I wasn't confident enough to write on my own at that point, so I got a professor that I had written the piece for the class to co-write it with me, and then that got published, and that was on urban natives before and after RCAP, I think. And then I had another piece in crime law and social change that I got published right around the same time that I had no revisions on. So I thought I just didn't get published, and then suddenly they sent back proofs.
They didn't message you to say, "Hey, yeah, it's been accepted"?
No.
Wow.
No, but I didn't even get any reviews.
Really?
Well, I assume that it said it was peer reviewed, so someone reviewed it and said, "Yeah, I had no changes to it," which is never happens. I would send it out to another reviewer if a reviewer wrote back to me and said they had no suggestions for change, because that just means they're lazy. Yeah.
Have you noticed any difference between then and now versus, in terms of publication for articles and things like that?
Well, it's certainly slackened off in the last 3 years. I'm only basically publishing one article a year now. Before I was doing anywhere between my biggest year, the Metis book, the Indigenous Statistics book, and 4 articles all came out the same year. And I was going up for full professor that year. And aside from that, I usually do between 2 and 3 articles or chapters a year. But we have a book on New Directions in Metis Studies that's coming out next year. I have another book on Indigenous Foucault that if my co-editor gets in gear will be coming out. And then we have another Routledge handbook that'll be coming out probably next year. Yeah.
Indigenous Foucault, is that an anthology?
Well, yeah, it's an edited collection, so
Sweet.
yeah. It's taken forever to get it out, so
yeah.
That's with the University of Minnesota Press, I think. Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's certainly a lot more stuff to cite now than there was back in the day, and a lot more Indigenous Studies stuff to cite now than there was back in the day. Mm-hmm. That's awesome, obviously, but when the field gets bigger and the discipline grows, you get kind of higher and lower quality stuff, and so that creates a lot of infighting or kind of, maybe fighting's not the word, discussions about kind of whether to publish certain things or not. And there's a lot more identity politics now about who and what to publish and what not to, and I think a lot of that comes from the fallout from Andrea Smith. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Speaking of identity politics, is there any specific journal that you would prefer to publish in as opposed to another one?
Well, yeah, I mean, now I try and publish in Indigenous Studies journals, so Wakazaza or American Indian Journal of Culture and Research or the ASR one. It's like American Indian Journal of Culture and Research, but it's the smaller title. I can't remember what it's called. It was run out of...
I have no idea.
Yeah, there's another. Those were the two big ones in the field before Wakazaza came in, and then of course the NACE journal as well. Mm-hmm. But I haven't published in the NACE journal because I've been on the editorial board. So.
Oh, right.
Is there any reason why you choose to pick Indigenous Studies journals as opposed to anyone else?
Well, yeah, because disciplines become disciplines when people believe they're disciplines, and one of the things that you do to build up a discipline is to pick kind of flagship journals in that discipline and kind of build up the intellectual life around those journals. And so I would rather build up the life of Indigenous Studies as opposed to, like, I published in Economy and Society, which is a huge journal. I published in Nations and Nationalism, which is a huge journal. I mean, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. But I have no interest in building up the disciplines of any of those journals.
It's basically like building up the community, hey?
Yeah.
So you've been through, just kind of building on the peer review again, you've been through the peer review process probably many times, and you've probably been a peer reviewer before. Mm-hmm. And I think most of us at this table have been a peer reviewer as well. I've yet to be peer reviewed, but do you have any advice for those who are either going into the peer review process or those who are peer reviewers when they're looking at Indigenous content papers?
If you get a peer review, whether it's good or bad, don't take it personally. Try and kind of break it down piece by piece by piece. Very often what you'll find in a peer review is that there's a lot of kind of debris that doesn't necessarily require a lot of work on your part. So it's almost as important to kind of understand how to answer the reviewer as it is to change the actual piece that you're being asked to change. So for example, this Métis Studies collection that we have coming out, I got this review on my piece in particular, which was really kind of snide, but also had some really super important points in it. And so I kind of pushed aside the snideness, which was like 3/4 of it, and then 1/4 of it kind of substantively changed the chapter in a really good and useful way. Mm-hmm. So that's the one thing I would say. The thing I would say for those who are just kind of publishing for the first time, it's never going to be perfect, but you owe the people who have trained you not to basically send in that's going to waste everybody's time to try and review.
Yeah.
That's not clear cut all the time, by the way, because I find that in Aboriginal policy studies, I can get a paper, send it out, and one person will say it's complete stir-fried, and the other person will say that it's the best thing since sliced bread, and it's because they're from different disciplines, and so they're interested in different kinds of things. But I would say when you're getting a review, don't take it personally. Do the best you can when you're sending it out. And I would say that when you're actually reviewing, be specific about what you think your issues with the paper actually are. And for Christ's sake, don't be scared to say nice things about the thing that you're reviewing as well. Because a lot of people don't. I just did a review of an edited collection. It ended up being 18 pages single-spaced because it was terrible. But there was 3 or 4 pieces in it that were amazing. And so I was very clear on kind of what was amazing about them and why I think they probably deserved a better home than this edited collection.
Yeah, I just wrote my first book chapter in like September, and when I got my peer review back, I was just kind of like had this mentality of like, get bent, you don't know what you're talking about with the peer reviewer. But then I did have to kind of put it aside and be like, okay, like they're actually making some good points. Like I need to get over that.
For sure, because if this is ultimately a collegial enterprise you don't get to decide on your own whether it's good or not. That's the whole point of sending it out for peer review.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is that don't kind of send it out to all and sundry before you send it out to peer review. Only send it out to friends and people you trust to give you useful comments on it. Don't send it out to anyone else, because otherwise people are just going to write you criticisms of the paper that they would have written if they had written the paper but didn't.
Was there anything about like the publishing process that surprised you?
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing that surprised me most, and I didn't expect it to surprise me. When you finish a book and it goes into the physical production of the book, you are the least valued member of that production team.
Jeez.
You're basically
That's depressing.
well, because everything they're doing, they're kind of surgeons and wizards at what they do.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I was getting Metis published, they sent me a couple of book titles, and I fought back and forth with them for about a month over the correct book title. They had terrible book titles. And so we finally settled on the title Métis Race Recognition and the Struggle for Indigenous Peoplehood. The actual title that they gave me, the actual book cover that they gave me, I really liked, but I didn't like the font of the title. And so I wrote back to them and I said, hey, I really like this book title, but can you change the font? And so the book acquisition editor said, well, I'll go check. And so I didn't hear back from her for a week, so I contacted her and I said, hey, like, what's going on? She said, yeah, the graphic designer said, no, he's not changing anything, because he's won awards for like 10 different titles. And next time, you want to make comments on the title, perhaps you're cool with him coming and making comments on the stuff you write in the book. Yeah. So it's very clear that when you finish writing the book and you've done all of the copy editing and everything, you're done at that point. That's you. And then after that, you hand it over to experts who actually kind of put it into production. And in fact, I actually spelled my wife's name wrong in my acknowledgments. And so we didn't find out until the ebook was published. Because her name is Agnieszka Wachocka, so Agnieszka, but for some reason it got transposed to Agnieszka. So nobody, unless you were from Poland, you'd have no idea that it was misspelled, because the name looks like somebody tripped with a Scrabble board. But when I saw it, I contacted them and said, hey, my wife's name is spelled, because we were sitting on the couch. I said, oh, look, on the e-version of the book is out. And she said, oh, cool, let me see. So she started reading the acknowledgments and she said, hey, you spelled my name wrong. And I said, say that's not very nice. And she's like, no, it's not very nice. You spelled my name wrong.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh my God. And so I contacted them and I asked if they could get it changed, and it was going to be really expensive to change it. But then it turned out, because I had got my copy edits in so quickly, they basically did it for free and just changed the two. And I never would have caught it had she not just been reading it like after I gave it to her.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing that surprised me, was how not central you are to the book process once you finished your part. You are kind of the intellectual force of the book, but books are actual physical processes with kind of experts and sites and all of that kind of stuff, of which you know nothing, basically. So you're basically just getting in the way if you try and sort of give them ideas about kind of what to do with what. They're like, yeah, we got it.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So how much power do you actually have over
Zero.
the title and over the cover image, I guess?
Well, the contract you sign, they get the final word. But no, especially a university press, no university press worth their salt is ever going to ram through a title that the author doesn't like. And God bless my book acquisition editor, Darcy Cullen at UBC Press. But she worked with me for a month to get the book title. So I wish I had named the book something different than I did. Like after the book came out, I had this flash, and I wish I had named the book Métis Beyond Mixedness, and then put the same kind of colon afterwards. But I'm like the George Costanza of book title writers.
I guess so.
The shrimp store called way too late in order to. So yeah, but that's the biggest surprise to me. And the other surprise to me was how easy it is to write 250 pages and how hard it is to actually maintain a thread of thought over 250 pages. Like how much back and forth work there is between different chapters to make sure that the chapters connect with each other. I thought I would never be able to write that many pages in my entire life. Turns out not a problem. But making it seamless is much more difficult than I thought.
Are you talking about Métis in this instance?
Métis, but also especially writing with a co-writer in the Indigenous Statistics book was really tough to kind of make consistency across chapters.
Do you have any advice for new academics or other writers about how to navigate this relationship?
Between?
between editors, publishing presses.
Or even like co-author versus co-author, with co-author.
With co-authors.
I don't want to pit them against each other, but...
Well, with co-authors, I would assuming the person is a friend of yours, make sure you guys agree up front what each person's contribution is going to be, because that can end in tears if you don't. In terms of the actual editing process, they're not taking anything personally, so you can't take it personally either. So make sure you exist in a tension between, being kind of humble when you're dealing with the editor, and yet also trusting your gut. So if you feel like you're being kind of taken advantage of or insulted or whatever, you have to, and then figure out who your mentors are, who you can go to talk to make sure that you're not kind of like not over or understepping something. Yeah, I would say too that for people who are just starting out writing, I always suggest 2 books for people to read. One is called How to Write a Lot by Silva, and it's amazing. And the other one is called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and it's all about how to kind of push back or push through boundaries that keep you from finishing stuff. Because most people don't finish dissertations not because they couldn't write enough material for a dissertation. They don't finish dissertations because they never made a decision about what the central idea of their dissertation is. And so they ended up writing 3 quarter dissertations. So you've got 200 pages on this thing, you've got 200 pages on this, and then you've got 200 pages on this thing, and never the twain shall meet. And that's usually why people don't finish. To write something is not to write something else. So how do you make a decision to justify why you wrote what you wrote, and then to also justify why you're not writing something else?
Well, I know that a lot of, at least in just academics, they're also thinking about their community as well. What would you say, or what kind of advice would you give for those folks who are writing for their community?
Well, I don't think you should be writing for your community.
Okay.
As an academic, I think it's too tough to write for your community. I think depending on the type of relationship you have with your community, you can write with community, or you can check in with community. It depends on the kind of project you're writing. If you're doing something that's more kind of creative, then you want to kind of make sure you have as many voices in the room as possible, and the right voices, and you want them to be consulted and equally important to feel consulted. If you're writing something that's kind of super academic, I'm not one of those people that thinks that you should be writing a piece that kind of fits all these different audiences. We're very specialized. Yeah. We're like mechanics, right? So why would you write something for a mechanic and yet also write something for somebody else? Because the point of publishing is to advance knowledge and move you along in your career. And it's the same thing I say about people's dissertations. The only people you write for in a dissertation is yourself and your committee. You're not writing for anybody else. If you want to do something for a community later or on the side, awesome. I think that's great and it's really ethical, but that's not the point of a dissertation. A dissertation is a credentialing exercise. Academic publications are the same way. They're credentialing exercises.
You're right. I can't imagine my community wanting to sit down and read my dissertation.
My community sure as hell didn't want to read mine.
Oh, yeah, I imagine it's so dry to them.
Yeah, well, for sure. And that's okay. Like, no one ever tells my cousin who's a power engineer to write a manual that everybody can read.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's true.
Or a mechanic. Write a mechanic manual that everybody can read. Why? Yeah, I'm a big believer that different communities kind of exist in relationship to and with each other, but we still have our own kind of forms of specialization that need to be kind of honored and valued.
Yeah, for sure. Can I ask you about Aboriginal policy studies?
Sure.
So what's the difference between editing and publishing for, I guess, emerging academics or young authors versus yourself? Is there a difference?
Well, I think young academics tend to be less sure of themselves and their arguments, and so they probably do more work than they would do later in their career. Do more work in terms of like fixing stuff up. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world, because fixing stuff up is another way of kind of translating between what they're telling you and how you put that into kind of the narrative that you've already constructed, and that's fine, and that's never a bad thing. I would say the other thing is sometimes the stuff that junior scholars write is of a higher quality than the stuff that later career people write, if they don't put the time and energy into writing something that's actually kind of robust. Because there's been some direct that I've come across that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe so-and-so, that's why they're letting him publish it, because he's 80. But it's like, is recycling arguments from 25 years ago.
Yeah. Would you say that that's because of apathy or because of their well-known name?
Yeah, I think a well-known name, venerability. Sometimes they, despite the fact that it's pretty roughly hewn, they still have pretty good points that they're making in the piece because they've been around forever. But I find that the kinds of pieces you get from junior scholars tend to be less about kind of driving a particular idea forth and more about collecting the literature to sort of talk about how they're emerging from a particular literature.
Yeah.
I think as you get further on in your career, not everybody, but lots of people will pick a particular argument they don't like and then use that as the basis to make their argument, as opposed to a junior person who will say, I'm interested in Indigenous feminism, and then give 15 sources on Indigenous feminism. They both have their roles to play, but I think it's more intellectually generous to be very explicit about kind of who your forebears are and kind of the way that you're contributing and taking from the literature. It's just harder and takes longer.
I know just because of comps and other classes and other things like that, that you have this newer publication sources and methods within Indigenous Studies. And I guess I'm curious as to if you think that there's a big difference between that publication versus your personal publication of Métis. Because I know that Sources and Methods has a lot of like really fascinating, interesting, almost pushing the boundaries in terms of research. Like how is that?
But I mean, an editor is so different than being a co-writer. An editor is basically you relying on the relationships that you built over years. At least this is the way Sources and Methods worked, to actually have people come together and write something for you who otherwise wouldn't do it. I was really lucky that Jeannie O'Brien, who's like this really brilliant historian at University of Minnesota, asked me to do this with her. So between the two of us, we knew most of the people that are doing good stuff in Indigenous Studies, and I think with maybe one or two exceptions, everybody said yes. And then so at that point, it's not about putting forward an intellectual argument, although we did write an introduction. It's about wrangling people and then also getting them to write an abstract so that you're not having to write every abstract, because I think there's like 40
there's
40
a lot,
people
there's
or something
a lot of
like
chapters
that.
in there,
yeah. But if we had to write a summary of each of the chapters going forward, it would have taken us another 5 months, 6 months to do it.
How would you say then that, how did you develop those relationships? Is this a matter of like,
Just going to
years
NASA.
After going to NASA?
Yeah, going to NASA. It's the major way of doing it. And some people I didn't know, but she knew really well. Some people she didn't know, but I knew really well. I count probably maybe 10 of the people in that volume were really close friends. Other people were just people who are really well known in the field. I wouldn't say I love their work, but that's okay because I'm not in the discipline that they were kind of trained in, and vice versa. So yeah, editing is really about wrangling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is NASA, for those who don't know?
Native American and Indigenous Studies Association. It's the largest Indigenous Studies association in the world. It's in New Zealand this year. Yeah.
New Zealand this year. I think it's Toronto next year, hey?
Yeah, and I don't know where after that.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm just gearing in for Toronto because I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah, it should be fine. It should be fine. I mean, this will be my 12th year or 13th year of going. I almost didn't go this year.
Really?
Yeah, well, I'm really
for
busy.
Funding?
Yeah.
Busy.
No, not funding. I have lots of funding. It's I don't have time to actually spend the funding because I'm doing the two jobs at the same time. It's very difficult to get time away between doing the interim institutional stuff and then doing the dean stuff. But in the end, I wanted to see the people who were there, and I'm sure we'll do something kind of slightly more formal when we get there between University of Waikato and University of Alberta, between the Faculty of Māori Studies there and the Faculty of Native Studies here. I don't know what exactly, but we'll figure something out.
Totally. I know that we're very thankful that you were able to carve out an hour at least to speak with us about all of your publications, because, I mean, the books that you've written are so foundational to Indigenous Studies and Métis Studies.
Yeah, but I'll tell you that I know you guys are just being really nice and that's great, but the Indigenous Studies and Métis Studies in particular really is a what have you done for me lately? Because that book got published in 2014 and already it doesn't have the staying power that other books and other disciplines have, and that's actually not a bad thing. That's a good thing because it just means the field is moving along so quickly, and so the arguments that I made about kind of what makes Métis have been kind of foundational in that sense. But my book rarely gets used for the stuff that I thought was kind of the best parts of the book, the stuff around law, the stuff around the census. Nobody uses it. They just sort of complain about how I staked out a particular kind of boundary for what Métis identity is and either critique it or agree with it and then kind of move on.
So what's that like on a personal level, having your personal work? Or I imagine it took many, many years to write this book.
Yeah,
How does that
it took
feel?
like 12 years.
having so and so just dispute it or whatever, you know.
Oh, I don't mind that. And there's lots of things obviously that are weak in the book. And I actually had several female friends, because I had some gender stuff in the book before I put it out, and they basically said, no, it's terrible, take it out. And then kind of do something with gender in the future. And I was like, oh, okay. So I took it out and put it forward. But it was the first kind of book of its kind. So, and books can't do everything. There's nothing in there on kind of disability, on LGBTQ, like any of that kind of stuff, right? So,
yeah.
But I mean, it's still a totally valid critique that it doesn't talk about gender specifically. Gender specifically, especially given the role that Métis women have played in kind of Métis governance and in the courts. It feels like if it's somebody I care about and they make a critique of the book, then I take the critique to heart. If it's somebody I don't respect and they make a critique of the book, I don't care. I think it had 16 reviews, and all of them basically said the same thing. Chris really seems to know what he's talking about, but he's sure going to make a lot of people mad with this book. It's like, all right. I don't care. I'm pretty good with critique in the sense if it's someone whose opinion I respect about something and they critique me on something, then it gives me pause to think about it. And I don't always agree with them, but it's something I have to kind of process. If it's somebody I don't care for the opinion of, I'll still listen to their critique because it's possible that but generally speaking, I don't care.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised in cultural studies, right? And whenever they said, if there's a stir, I guess, around your presentation or around your publication, that means it's a good thing.
But it's not always. Right? It could be a stir around really bad ones too.
I guess that's true.
Yeah, and has been.
Yeah.
It has been. Like if you look at these folks kind of on the East Coast and stuff, like it's banana. And the stuff that Daryl LaRue is doing right now with this book that's coming out, I think it's called Distorted Descent or Distorting Descent. And he's kind of showing all the different ways in which they're attempting to use genealogy as a way to kind of push this kind of frame of whiteness forward.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the totem poles with the eagle on the top on the East Coast, which doesn't make any sense.
Well, most of the stuff, people will sort of say that they're Métis because they have a lateral ancestor from like 3 times over and kind of 400 years back, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Whatever.
No. But that would have been my next book if I had actually hadn't taken on the deanship. Would have been about kind of that self-indigenization and those kind of that white possessiveness behind those claims.
It still could be.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Do you hope to get there? Like back to more writing?
No, not really.
No?
I mean, what I'm going to try and actually do is start writing blog stuff again.
Yeah.
Because it's like a couple thousand words I can kind of bang out in a couple of hours. I'm spending most of my time now as a dean doing edited collections. So I try and bring junior scholars along so they get publications on their CV, and then kind of just put stuff forward where wrangling doesn't take as much time as writing. And so it's easier for me to kind of ask people to do stuff, and then I just write an intro.
Yeah. So what would you say then about like virtual communities, like with social media or blogging or whatever, as opposed to traditional publishing?
I think people say smart stuff in a whole different variety of venues. I think they do different kinds of things. Kim Tallbear, most of the stuff she writes starts off as tweets, and then it turns into a blog, and then it turns into a chapter or an article. So there's lots of different ways to engage with it. I've actually gone off Twitter because I find it's too anxiety-inducing for me.
I noticed, yeah. A lot of people go on and off Twitter.
Yeah, I'm mostly off.
Yeah.
I don't get enough stuff out of it, and there's too much kind of Puritan politics on there. So if you say the wrong word or whatever, it's like, nah. For someone like me who says as many wrong words as I do, it's just better for me not to.
Not worth it.
Yeah, so I just go and watch Family Fight on Facebook, where I kind of know the players a bit better. I joke my family's not actually fighting right now, but I think they have different kinds of roles to play and different jobs that they do, and they can work really well with each other. The only thing is that I don't really see online communities as communities, because people for the most part can just step out whenever they want, and that's not really a community to me.
I guess that's true.
Yeah, there's a communitas, like there's a kind of a shared interpretation of what they're talking about, and that's all cool. But there isn't the same kind of accountability online as you would get with people who you grew up with or that you're related to or whatever. So I see that kind of as distinguishing.
Yeah.
As a distinguishing feature.
Yeah, relationality only goes to the face-to-face contact, right?
Yeah, but it's not like, there aren't real consequences in person sometimes for people that do things online. Like, for sure there is, but I still don't think it's the same as for good and ill.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it allows you to kind of do and be a particular thing online that you could never be in person, which is not terrible either.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but nobody's online is not going to say like, hey, aren't you, or like in real life, like, hey, aren't you this person on Twitter? or like, but is it in real life, like in our communities, people will definitely go like, aren't you this Larocque's kid? And I'm like, no, that's not me.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Or the opposite, someone will call you to account and you don't know them at all. You're just a stranger to me. And you didn't like because I used some magic word, and now I don't know you. Like, what do you mean I owe you an apology? I don't know you. I'm not.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing, right? So, yeah.
The sassy tweets. That's what I like to do sometimes.
I don't mind sassy tweets. I don't mind sassy tweets. And I grew up with really strong Indigenous women in particular. I have no problem, because sometimes I say dumb stuff, and it's cool to get called out on it. And people that call you out on it that still want to kind of talk to you afterwards, 100% not a problem with that. But if there's someone who they're just kind of doing this as part of the bulldozing that they're doing that day, I have no time for that.
Trolls.
Yeah. Well, not even trolls. Like, they may be kind of well-meaning people, but they're calling you on stuff, and they don't know you.
Yeah.
That's the thing that bothers me most about that environment. There's a great book called Against Purity, and it's all about kind of the way in which kind of this self-righteousness manifests itself in social media contexts.
So how do you mitigate that, and how do you...
You go off.
You go off? How do you talk to students about that?
Well,
I'm speaking as a student, of course.
But we talked about this in the professional development classes. You have to be careful, and you have to be able to protect your own spirit, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And so no one's going to miss you if you go off Twitter. But if you stop talking to family, people will miss you. So it's great that Twitter's here. It's great that people can use it and sort of gain value from it. Awesome. But it's no big impact on your life for the most part. For some people who grow up in really tough family situations, Twitter and social media more generally can be a lifeline. Totally get that, legit. But for a lot of people, they're on it because they're bored or because they find it fun or whatever. You have to make a decision about whether the risks are worth the reward. And if they're not, there's nothing saying you have to be on there.
That's
true. And you're really not going to lose any academic prospects because you're not on Twitter. You may not get some, but those are all kind of flash in the pan prospects anyway.
I'm wondering then, would you say that your work just speaks for yourself in terms of that you don't really need social media to be successful?
No, that's the opposite, actually.
I don't know.
No, my work never speaks for people never get out of my work what I think is in my work. And that's because I'm a really kind of dense writer. And so it makes it very difficult for people to... No, I never think that. I just mostly don't care. So if people like my stuff on Twitter or don't like my stuff on Twitter, I don't care. If people like my book or don't like my book, if they've got a good critique, then I'll listen to it. Otherwise, I don't care. Because have you ever heard that expression, the reason why infighting in academia is so vicious is precisely because the stakes are so small? People sometimes people just want to grind into you for things. It's like, just relax. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think caring less is something that junior professors, although it's really hard to do because you're beset by all the anxieties of getting tenure and all of that kind of stuff, it's a thick skin is something that's really important to muster, I would say.
Totally.
I still haven't yet, but that's what I always tell people, is a thick skin's really important. Because there are people who definitely have no interest in protecting your spirit, so you have to do it yourself.
I think that's a really important thing to kind of bring up too, right? Because we're holistic people, right? It's just not the one mental thing, which is what's really pushing academia. But
100%.
I mean, there's so many different parts of ourselves, and I think that's really important that you bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, when you'll say something and someone will say, oh, I can't believe you said that, that's the real you.
Yeah.
Well, no, they're all the real me. This is just, I said a bad word or I made a mistake or whatever, but it's like people focus on that one thing, and it doesn't matter all the other stuff that you've done. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think social media in particular is bad for that.
Oh yeah, I know. I've made many sassy tweets. I will speak for you.
Not me. No.
Not Sheila at all, ever. I know that your time is really valuable, so I guess we'll just wrap up with a final question.
Sure.
I know that our podcast is really to inspire Indigenous authors to get writing and write their stories and do academia or whatever it is that they want to do, however they want to publish. So would you have any advice for these people, whoever they may be, and how to get their stories out?
Well, I would say two things right off the bat. Write what you know and write what you love. So don't let people tell you that something is interesting or not interesting or doable or not doable. There's all kinds of stuff that gets published that people never would have expected to get published. Trust in yourself and trust the process. It's not enough that you want to write something. You actually have to put time with your bum in a seat and actually do it. And make sure you've got a good posse of people. You've got compadres that are actually willing to give you good, useful, constructive advice. And you have to believe in yourself because very few other people will. That's not the way academia is set up. If you're lucky, you get a number of good mentors that believe in you and will kind of help you not make kind of the worst missteps going forward. But not everyone is that lucky. We're really lucky in the faculty because we have a number of amazing people here, but not everybody. People are often in much more isolated situations. So it's really important to write what you know, write what you love, and believe in yourself.
Perfect.
God, that's so corny, but it's true.
It is, but it's true.
It's so true.
You really have to, because there's a lot of other people that won't, and not for good reason. They won't just because they're cynical, and it costs them nothing not to believe in you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you guys.
Chris. And I guess until next time.